Alright, so this year we have a situation with mail-in voting. And so I guess the way mail-in voting works is you get this little packet in the mail, and then you put it in this little special voting mailbox. And while it's a good concept, it's an okay concept, it really has too many kinks for it to actually work this year. Too many. For example, in Paterson, New Jersey, they had miscounted so many times that they have to redo the whole thing all over again. They have to recount the whole thing. So everybody's got to revote again in Paterson. The fact that miscounting is a whole other issue we have to deal with this year. Also, there's so much room for fraud. Like, say my neighbor goes out and I know he doesn't really check his mail, or like I see someone else's packet, somehow it was sent to my house. I could easily vote for them and it would count. I could vote for them and it would count.
In the midterms, last cycle, 2018, a voter registrar in Orange County described people dropping off hundreds of ballots at a time. Hundreds. 250,000 votes appeared from previously inactive voters who hadn't voted in at least 4 years.
And I guess in theory it's a good idea, like, oh, you get this packet and you just put in your vote and then you send it back. Like, it sounds so nice, it sounds so simple, but it's not that simple. If the world was perfect, maybe it would be simple, but there's so much room for fraud. I guess the votes go in this like little box thing. If I wanted to, or if anyone wanted to, I could steal the box, burn the box, I don't know. And so Donald Trump wants to deploy police officers to guard these voting stations so that there's no fraud, there's no foul play. But people are like, oh, that's so suspect of Donald Trump to like deploy all these police officers. He's probably up to something suspicious. And then people, if Donald Trump wins, they're not gonna count it. They're probably gonna be like, oh, it's because he was cheating and he wasn't being honest and he was tampering with the election. But if he doesn't deploy these police officers, then there is probably gonna be so much room for fraudulent behavior, for fraud. And supposedly the reason for all this chaos is because coronavirus. You can't go out to vote, you're gonna catch COVID, you're gonna kill all the old people. But it is okay. It's okay, don't worry. It's okay for you to attend this Black Lives Matter rally with thousands of people. Multiple times. You could go multiple times and you won't catch anything. Are you kidding me? If coronavirus is as serious as everyone's making it out to be, why would it have an agenda? Like, why would it, oh, if you're going for Black Lives Matter, you're okay. If you're going out to vote, death! I'm literally losing brain cells thinking about it. It doesn't make any sense. Anyway, so the Democrats are really trying to push the mail-in voting that has so many flaws. There's so many room for fraud, so many room for miscounting. Even Anthony Fauci said we'd probably be okay going out to vote as long as we wore masks and stood 6 feet apart like we've been doing this year. So why, when we vote, why do we have to like, oh, stay at home and like send it in through the mail? And, like, even Anthony Fauci said that it would be okay if we wore a mask, stood 6 feet apart. There's this theory that the election could be delayed because of all the miscounted votes and all the fraud, that the election could be delayed. So delayed that Nancy Pelosi has a shot at becoming president, which is a form of tampering. Like, it doesn't have to be this way. Like, it could just be simple, because you really don't want Donald Trump to be president. You would rather delay the whole thing, delay the whole election, in hopes that maybe Nancy Pelosi could become president. It would just be so simple if you could just go out to vote with a mask on, at least. Even though COVID's probably not as bad as they say it is, but the least you could do is put on a mask, stand 6 feet apart from everybody. Not mail-in voting. The Democrats are making it so much more complicated than it has to be. It doesn't have to be this complicated. You're just making it complicated because you don't want Donald Trump to win. So you're making all these distractions, like police hatred and Black Lives Matter and COVID, all to distract us from this election, all to make Donald Trump look bad, to get what you want. It's really simple. It's simple. You vote for who you want to vote for. People just vote for who you want to vote for.
Ladies and gentlemen, the stories that you just heard from my sister can be better understood in light of the principle. The DP says, the era when the paths of these good and evil sovereignties intersect in the last days. This is also the time when Adam and Eve's fall from the top of the growth stage will be restored through indemnity. All people in this era will suffer through great ideological confusion, as much as the first human ancestors at the point of their temptation were utterly confused as to whom they should obey and what should guide their actions. Let me explain good and evil sovereignties. Human beings are made to be sovereign. God's people are sovereign and guided by God. to harmonize with what it means to be human. Fallen people exist within a stolen sovereignty, and they do not have the benefit of understanding what it means to be human. These two sovereignties behave differently in the last days. The evil sovereignty is on the decline. None of their experiments are working. In the end, they'd rather scorch the earth, destroy everything. And that's what we see in this story. This is why Democrats would destroy the entire voting system. Push a method of voting that's never been used before, proven to allow tremendous amounts of voter fraud, rather than let Donald Trump win fairly. Concurrently, the good sovereignty learns more and more how to neutralize the trickery of the evil sovereignty. But there is a measure of confusion. Even still, there is a measure of confusion to this mail-in voting story. One side says that we have a good enough reason to change the way that we vote at the last minute. And they also say that the other side should allow it, or else they're guilty of voter suppression. The confusion arises around the issue of whether we should focus on voting norms that have been around for centuries, or fly-by-night, frivolous plans of voter suppression. To focus on the latter is to accept the burden of proof. Why should Republicans feel the need to prove that they're not engaged in voter suppression when they're not engaged in voter suppression? It's a distraction to keep us distracted from maintaining voter practices that have stood for centuries and worked. In the last days, if we accept the burden to prove ourselves to a bunch of tricksters, prove ourselves to these new, by any means necessary, Weasley Democrats, believe it or not, we could lose our whole country. This leads me to another divine principle quote, wherein accepting the burden of proof could have lost us the entire cosmos. When Satan dared Jesus to throw himself down, it meant that he wanted to usurp Jesus' position as the Lord of the temple, by enticing Jesus to fall from that position to the lowly state of a fallen person. At that moment, Jesus answered to him, "You shall not tempt the Lord your God." This is why conservatives who cling to the Constitution, who have a reason to maintain voting practices the way that they've always been, should not lower themselves and act like criminals who need to prove their innocence in the area of voter suppression. We are being tempted to prove that we're not criminals, and this is how we lose our sovereignty. Right now, we are in a lose-lose situation, where one, it is very possible for the Democrats to commit voter fraud and rig the entire election, and two, if Donald Trump accepts this and uses the appropriate response setting up these guards to guard these mail-in voter boxes, he's going to be accused of rigging it himself if he won. They are taking Donald Trump as well as us and putting them in a position where if we choose to accept this, on the one hand, we are submitting to being vulnerable to being robbed, and on the other, being accused of robbery. To avoid this conundrum, conservatives should focus on doing things the way that is time-tested.